Hey, everybody. It is Monday, August 18th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Mununu.
And I am Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. And sometimes we play on the same softball team, Jill.
The winning softball team, Moshe.
That is correct, Jill. We won 9-6 this Saturday.
So everyone who listened on Friday, I mentioned that Moshe and I were going to be playing in the Artists and Writers charity softball game in the Hamptons. I think it's the 70-something year that they've been doing it.
It goes back to the 1950s.
And it's cool because there's some big names that tend to play. Carl Bernstein, he doesn't play anymore, but he was the first base coach. Mike Lupica, a very well-known sports author and writer.
Yes, Mike is effectively team captain. He's also the third base coach, and his son Alex, who worked with me at CBS and now runs a show over on MSNBC, plays as well.
Right. So just a lot of fun, all for a good cause. And as I mentioned on Friday, last year, I didn't get to play. I think I was a new face. No one knew what to expect. And I'm not saying I played a lot, but I did contribute this year, Moshe.
You did. For those who were following on the premium Instagram feed, you saw Jill got herself into scoring position on third base and then made her way home for a key tie run early on that gave us the momentum. We eventually won 9-6. And we should mention also Ken Aletta as captain, longtime writer for The New Yorker. Also, Walter Isaacson, the famous author who's written a number of books some of you may have read, plays. And in previous years, if you go back to decades, a whole number of everyone from singer Paul Simon to a number of other actors. I think Alec Baldwin played for a number of years. So it's like artists versus writers. It's a charity softball game. I've played for a few years, and it was fun to be in the dugout with Jill this weekend as our kids joined and watched the game unfold as well. A very fun day out there in East Hampton, New York.
All right, now to the headlines. We're starting with the latest on ceasefire talks between Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine's Vladimir Zelensky, along with European leaders, will be at the White House today to talk about next steps. This follows President Trump's summit Friday with Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, what we're learning about that shortened summit was shorter than expected. They actually canceled the luncheon they had planned. What we're learning about actually what went down there, what U.S. leaders are saying, Russian leaders are saying, and what we can expect from the Zelensky meeting. Remember, the last time he was in the White House, he was effectively kicked out. So we are watching very closely, as is the world, about what is unfolding at the White House today.
Staying in the nation's capital, several Republican-led states are sending hundreds of more National Guard troops to Washington, D.C. as President Trump cracks down on crime, illegal migrants, and homelessness.
Yeah, we'll have the latest numbers from D.C., as well as a move to potentially arm National Guard troops in the coming days.
Meanwhile, ICE is launching an aggressive recruiting push that includes massive bonuses. Then to the latest on Hurricane Erin, what we know about the first Atlantic hurricane of the year. The storm hit Category 5 over the weekend, an escalating national battle over redrawing House districts as each party looks to win next year's midterms amid a razor-thin margin, what the governor of California is saying, and how Indiana is trying to help Republicans.
Yeah, this is now a state-by-state gerrymandering war. We'll tell you the latest as the Democrats that left Texas have returned this weekend.
And no real surprise here, but Taylor Swift's New Heights podcast episode breaks records. Moshe, did you listen over the weekend? I mentioned on Friday that is what you were going to be watching.
Yes, I actually technically listened to it. I didn't watch it on YouTube, but we'll have the numbers on how many of you did watch it on YouTube.
And Moshe is on this day in history.
A big day for women in America, the end of a 72-year fight. We'll tell you which one.
All right, Russian President Vladimir Putin left his high-stakes in-person summit with President Trump in Alaska without agreeing to a ceasefire deal on Friday. Today, President Trump will have a face-to-face with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and European leaders. They'll be meeting at the White House to talk about next steps. The heads of NATO and the European Union, along with major European powers like France, the UK, Germany, Italy, and Finland, will be at the high-stakes meeting. A reminder, the last time Zelensky was at the White House back in March, he was effectively kicked out by the president after having a heated Oval Office exchange with President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance.
Yeah, now things have changed. Zelensky has gotten a better sense of how Trump rolls. Curious if he even goes the extra mile today, Joe, and decides to wear a suit. That apparently is something that's been discussed behind the scenes. Something Trump complained about last time was his attire, even though Zelensky has spent more than 3 years of the war in military-like fatigues and not wearing formal suit attire. So that's some of the color we'll be watching today. And the meeting does come after about several weeks now, where Trump has been increasingly critical of Putin, at least in public comments, though in that face-to-face meeting in Alaska at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson on Friday, there was a handshake, there was smiling, there was a ride in the presidential limousine. He invited Putin into the limousine. There was also a B-2 bomber flyover, which you can read into multiple ways. We posted the clip over on Instagram. The B-2 obviously can be seen as a sign of respect, but also a projection of U.S. military strength. Remember, the B-2 was involved in the bombing of the Iranian nuclear program and can carry nuclear weapons itself. And so the B-2 buzzed over Putin's head as he arrived there for that summit. Now, that was the first time Putin was on American soil in more than a decade. It was the first meeting between an American president and the Russian leader since before Putin invaded Ukraine. It received a lot of criticism, but ultimately you do have folks at the White House, including Trump, who say this war cannot be resolved without a face-to-face meeting. And while there was no deal, and the meeting lasted shorter than expected, Russian officials going into it said this could last 6 or 7 hours. They got out of there in 2.5 hours. They did a joint press conference, or at least joint appearance. It wasn't really a press conference because neither of them took questions from the media, though that was expected prior to this, and a luncheon was canceled. Now, Trump still called the meeting extremely productive. He did an interview with Sean Hannity from Fox News afterwards, saying he would rate the meeting a 10 out of 10. Here's a bit of what Trump said late Friday.
But we had an extremely productive meeting, and many points were agreed to. There are just a very few that are left. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, but we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there.
Now, that one thing that's pretty significant, we're assuming that's the ceasefire. Though they weren't explicit about that, but one can presume that an end to fighting, that was something Trump has been looking for a while, and said he would be very angry in the lead up to the meeting if he didn't achieve that. Putin, during that brief joint appearance, did joke that the next summit should be in Moscow. That's something Trump was reluctant to agree to. It appears Putin really stuck to his hardline position on Ukraine. He made a whole mini speech about how this has to do with fundamental threats to Russian security, even though he's the one who invaded Ukraine. But he's been demanding Ukraine cede large areas of territory, disarm, abandon NATO membership, even change its government to be more Russia-friendly. So at least as of Friday, it did not appear that Putin had made any concessions.
However, on Sunday, Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff said that Putin might be open to an EU or US security guarantee for Ukraine. So that would be a very big change and could prevent a future invasion, which has been the fear for Ukraine. But a reminder that Putin has repeatedly said that there is no such thing as a Ukrainian people separate from Russia. Witkoff on Sunday compared the potential deal to an Article 5 type protection. Article 5 is actually the name of the collective defense principle that NATO uses. So this would be on par with that potentially, meaning that if Russia invaded Ukraine again, it would trigger larger Western support. So this would serve many goals. It would avoid Ukraine joining the NATO military alliance, which Putin is against, but it could potentially be a significant enough guarantee to make Zelensky feel confident in conceding territory. Witkoff also said that Putin agreed to legislative enshrinement that Russia would not push into other Ukrainian or European territory as part of the deal. No word, though, from Putin's end publicly if he agreed to it.
Right. That's just Witkoff reporting back on the meeting. Also, some people taking with a grain of salt that Putin would legislatively enshrine it. He controls the legislature in Russia, so just as easily he could pull back on that guarantee in future years. So those will be among the things that Zelensky will be talking about with Trump. They're going to have a one-on-one, Joe, and then there's going to be a separate meeting with the European leaders later at the White House, though. As we've been watching the events unfold in recent days, these things are changing hour by hour. Now, Zelensky did respond to that alleged report of a security guarantee, saying that is a significant change, but said details matter here. And Zelensky is also saying that while he knows he might not be able to get NATO, that's also something, by the way, we should mention, Trump is against. Beyond Putin, Zelensky still wants membership in the economic partnership, the European Union, and views that to be part of the guarantee. Putin has been against EU membership for Ukraine as well. So a lot to discuss here. Trump did tell the European leaders post-summit that he's open to U.S. security guarantees for Ukraine. That's something that he's been opposed to in the past. And he also seemed open to a deal that would require Western troops on the ground in Ukraine, because, again, part of Zelensky's deal here is, he's acknowledged that Putin has made major traction in the war, that it's close to impossible for Ukraine to unilaterally push back Russian troops after 3.5 years. At the same time, he's reluctant to make a deal here because he knows that Putin every few years just decides to invade again. So if he feels like there's enough security guarantees and, there's European troops on the ground, that could serve as an impediment to block Putin from a future invasion. It could give him confidence here. So we will watch the readout, the body language, the readout, the statements, both at the White House today and in the coming days to see what happens next.
And back to those talks in D.C. today, Secretary of State Marco Rubio says that the U.S. is still holding out hope for a ceasefire deal. This is what he said on CBS yesterday.
I'm not saying we're on the verge of a peace deal, but I am saying that we saw movement, enough movement to justify a follow-up meeting with Zelensky and the Europeans, enough movement for us to dedicate even more time to this.
And then he also pushed back on Face the Nation host Margaret Brennan, who said that European leaders are coming to Washington to stop Zelensky from being bullied into a deal. Rubio called that a, quote, stupid media narrative and said that the Trump administration invited the Europeans to be at the meeting, and that's why they're going to be there.
Yeah, you've seen a lot of narratives playing out publicly. You've seen pushback from the White House. Clearly, if you look at what happened on Friday, the White House was hoping for more, but they want to focus on the fact that they believe they were able to make some progress there, as you just heard Marco Rubio state. At the same time, there is a lot of concern that they will force the Ukrainians to make a bad deal. And that's why you are seeing a number of those European countries there. But the White House would like to frame that as, well, we had to invite them to come here. It's not like they're coming to protect him in any way, shape, or form. And ultimately, Rubio and the White House team say that they're just trying to make peace here in a war that sees thousands of people dying on a weekly basis, again, more than 3 years in. The Trump people argue here that even if they don't like Putin, they disagree with him, they need to meet face-to-face with him to get this done. He is the more powerful aggressor here in this conflict. And short of the U.S. sending troops into Ukraine, Ukraine has no real shot here of being able to push back the Russians from the territory they've taken, which is about 20% of Ukraine over the course of the last 3 years. At the same time, there was a lot of criticism over the red carpet treatment that he got, the handshaking, the smiling, the ride in Trump's limousine. And so you saw a lot of critics saying, Jill, that, there's an arrest warrant out for war crimes against Putin involving also taking tens of thousands of Ukrainian children forcibly into Russia, a variety of actions that the International Criminal Court would like to try Putin on. And so the fact that, he was given this sort of head of state welcome in Alaska was criticized, including by the conservative Wall Street Journal editorial board. Now, we should mention Rupert Murdoch's Wall Street Journal board, more traditional conservative, so they will sometimes take issue with what Trump has to say. The editorial board writing over the weekend, the Russian leader achieved one of his major goals from the summit, which is the start of the rehabilitation as a world leader. The summit ended his isolation from the West, and he gave up nothing for it. He also appears to have gained more time to continue bombing Ukrainian cities and slowly taking more territory.
And Moshe will have coverage of the meeting and anything that potentially comes out of it over on the Instagram account that is at Moshe, Mosheh.
Yeah, we'll have it over there, Jill. We also started on Friday taking live events on the Mo News YouTube page. So if you're on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to that. And also for premium members, we now make all content available on our website. So in real time, all the Instagram posts now available via our website. And it serves as a mobile app. So you have one touch, one button access to all of our coverage without even going to Instagram. That is a perk we are rolling out right now to premium members. So if you're looking for another reason to join Mo News Premium, check it out over at mo.news/premium. Your ability to do digital detox and get all of your Mo News Instagram coverage off of Instagram.
All right, time for the speed read from Semaphore. 3 U.S. Republican-led states deployed hundreds more National Guard troops to Washington, D.C. over the weekend. The 750 National Guard troops will join 800 already in Washington, D.C. The troops are from South Carolina, Ohio, and West Virginia. D.C.'s Mayor, Muriel Bowser, denounced the deployments on social media Saturday night. She says, quote, American soldiers and airmen policing American citizens on American soil is un-American. The White House says that the National Guard troops may also soon carry weapons. That is a reversal from their initial orders, which specified that National Guard members should wear body armor but leave their weapons at the armory. As of this taping, the troops are still awaiting written instructions from senior Defense Department officials. The National Guard isn't making arrests at this time. They're there to protect federal buildings and monuments and more generally deter crime.
Jill, this all comes as there was an emergency court hearing late on Friday that actually led the Trump administration to rescind the order on the takeover of the police. Remember, they had been very assertive last week. Initially, there was a lawsuit filed, and effectively, the Attorney General backed down a bit in terms of their directive when it comes to the police, keeping the current chief of police in place who reports to the mayor. But still, the feds here inserting themselves. Trump has said he wants to do more about the violent crime rate in Washington, even though it has been coming down officially, the official numbers in recent years, though you have seen a number of high-profile crimes, including carjackings, including one that killed a former Trump official in recent months here. As far as the National Guard is concerned, their job has been largely to serve as a very visible presence in public areas. Several of you sent me photos from outside Union Station, the main train station in D.C., where you have now National Guards with Humvees stationed outside. They've also been assigned various administrative and logistical duties, but apparently they are looking at having them armed here in terms of the rules of engagement and what that means for their role. That still remains a big question. A reminder when it comes to the D.C. National Guard versus the other state National Guards, because D.C. doesn't have a governor and D.C. has limited self-rule. It's effectively run by Congress, aspects of it. That does give the president much more authority here, though ultimately, if this is to go long-term, he is going to need legislation from Congress to keep this going. As far as the impact so far and the numbers, authorities say that more than 300 arrests have been made in D.C. over the last week, including 135 illegal migrants who have been arrested during that time in D.C. They also say that 25 homeless encampments have been removed and 53 firearms have been seized from the federal authorities that Trump deployed over the last week.
Sticking with law enforcement, from the Wall Street Journal, the federal government is going big to recruit new immigration enforcement officers. There is a nationwide campaign using patriotic imagery, celebrity endorsements, and hefty financial perks as a way to lure applicants. We are talking up to $50,000 in signing bonuses and $60,000 in student loan forgiveness. Although no college degree is required, one social media campaign positioned the job as a way to, quote, deport illegals with your absolute boys, a way of saying close friends. 1990s Superman actor Dean Cain, if you remember him, he is 59 years old, is reportedly joining ICE. Cain can now join because the Department of Homeland Security in August lifted the age cap for law enforcement roles and opened a deportation officer position specifically for people over 40.
Yeah, so they're trying a lot of different angles here. There have also been social media posts because, of course, Dean Cain, Superman, if you're under 40, it probably has little resonance for you. But they have done a lot of social media posts, bringing back the classic Uncle Sam, American symbol, pointing, saying your country needs you. Remember, we told you that the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, the massive tax and spending bill that was passed earlier this summer, included $150 billion for immigration enforcement. It'll make ICE bigger than the FBI. ICE, the biggest federal law enforcement agency in the U.S. 110,000 people have applied so far. Positions range from deportation officers to criminal investigators, with a number of salaries that can climb into the six figures here. Deportation officers begin at just about 50,000 and go up to 100,000 a year. Criminal investigators run between 60,000 and 144,000. And for aspiring law enforcement officials, the pay is very competitive, especially when you compare it to joining the NYPD, where you make roughly about 61,000 a year as a starting officer. The Chicago Police Department, they pay about 62,000. And these signing bonuses, Jill, that you mentioned, $50,000, a huge differentiator. So there's certainly a lot of local law enforcement who are struggling with recruitment right now, saying that this will make it even more challenging for them.
From USA Today, the first major Atlantic hurricane of 2025 impacted Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands this weekend and will continue through today. Now, the hurricane is not at risk of hitting the continental United States or making landfall, but if you do live along the coast or planning to be on the coast this week, you could feel the impact. Hurricane Erin weakened to a Cat 3 hurricane Sunday after briefly strengthening to a Category 5 storm, but it's still growing in overall size. Erin had a maximum sustained winds of 125 miles per hour. Swells were expected to affect portions of the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and the Turks and Caicos Islands during the next couple of days.
Yeah, so making the move basically initially east and now northward. And so again, it'll basically go along the east coast. And as it gets stronger and wider, you may feel some of the winds, but particularly there'll be monster storm surf, rip currents that the Weather Service says will be life-threatening to beachgoers. I know I heard from some people over the weekend, surfers who are excited about this, but in North Carolina, you can see waves topping 20 feet on the Outer Banks. On Sunday, officials in Dare County, North Carolina, ordered evacuations for Hatteras Island, declared a state of emergency there, saying there's going to be life-threatening impacts along the coastline, even if the storm is hundreds of miles out. Effectively, right now, if you look at the routes and the various projections, it looks like Erin will make its way in between Bermuda and the eastern seaboard, but still a massive storm, very strong over the weekend. Ports were closed, flights were canceled, and so now as it makes its way to the east of Florida and then along the eastern seaboard, again, out there, but you're going to feel the effects in the Carolinas over the next 48 hours, then the Delmarva area, and then later this week, you'll see swells in the northeast off the coast of Long Island, Massachusetts, and Maine as it makes its way up. This is just the start of the strongest part of the hurricane season. August is when the tropics really come alive here. The busiest stretch runs from now through mid-October, and forecasters say to expect above average tropical activity this year. So it looks like we're okay so far with Erin, but I hope that people heed the warning about the rip currents and the surf, because it looks like it's going to be pretty strong.
From Politico, the battle over redistricting ahead of next year's congressional midterms is heating up as more blue states and red states look to potentially redraw lines to help their party win Congress. The White House and MAGA influencers are putting pressure on Republicans in Indiana to look at their maps. That is where Republicans control 7 out of 9 overall seats, but they could redraw the lines to push out the last 2 Democratic seats in Indiana. The effort comes as Texas Governor Greg Abbott on Friday called another special session to pass a new congressional map after that first attempt failed because Texas Democrats left the state. Those more than 50 Democrats who are looking to really just make a statement have been returning in recent days. Many have full-time jobs and families to return to. The bottom line, the Texas House could reach a quorum as soon as today as the standoff with the Democrats winds down. The second session is set to consider virtually the same agenda that stalled in the first. It will focus on redistricting and disaster response after the tragic floods in early July. The Texas House Democratic Caucus set conditions late last week for their return. They included the introduction of redistricting maps in California that would, quote, neutralize the proposed Texas changes. With quorum met, the Texas map is all but guaranteed to pass, and it will likely add 5 more Republican House seats ahead of the midterms. Democrats are still planning to challenge the maps in court once they are passed.
As of right now, Republicans control 25 of the 38 U.S. House seats in Texas. This would take it up to 30. Though you still hear Texas Democrats claiming they got a win here by leaving the state, getting a lot of attention to their cause. And that's because one of the things they're getting here is California says, you know, Texas, if you add 5 Republican seats, we will add 5 Democratic seats. Governor Gavin Newsom on Thursday said he is moving ahead with his state's redistricting plans. He announced a voter referendum for a special election this November that, if passed, will let California bypass the state's independent redistricting commission. Now, California is one of those states. There are entirely almost Democratic states that have built commissions to do redistricting because of this idea of partisan gerrymandering being a bad thing. But now you have Gavin Newsom and other Democrats saying they have effectively been unilaterally disarming politically because Republican states continue to gerrymander in that way. And while there are Democratic states that have done some pretty egregious gerrymanders, I'm looking at you, Illinois, ultimately, the majority of some of the worst gerrymanders we've seen in recent years have been Republican states. So Democrats saying they want to fight fire with fire here. Here's a bit of what Newsom said on Thursday, saying what Texas is doing is wrong, but California can't just sit back. Democrats need to take the fight to Republicans.
Today is Liberation Day in the state of California. And as Senator Schiff said, I know they say don't mess with, Texas. Well, don't mess with the great Golden State. And here we are, an open in plain sight before one vote is cast in the 2026 midterm election. And here he is once again trying to rig the system. It's not complicated. We're doing this in reaction to a president of the United States that called a sitting governor of the state of Texas and said, find me 5 seats. We can't stand back and watch this democracy disappear district by district all across this country.
So notable there, Jill, he's been using a lot of Trump rhetoric, Liberation Day, rigging the system. He's actually also changed his Twitter, his X account, to post in all caps and sound like Trump. It's almost like he's taking anything he wants to say and running it through AI and saying, make it sound like Donald Trump. And so he's been doing it day after day here. If you check out the California governor's X handle, it's basically an imitation of Donald Trump as he seeks to sort of goad the president into a fight. And all this comes as Democratic voters have said that their party has been too weak in fighting against Republicans. They've used words like weak, apathetic, ineffective, disorganized in a recent AP poll. So Gavin Newsom saying, well, essentially, Jill, 2 wrongs do make a right, because Texas is wrong, but we're going to do it too, because we can't just allow, all of this to go away. And so he now is challenging California voters to give him the authority to bypass his independent commission and gerrymander California even more aggressively.
It's so sad, I think. It really is, because the losers here are the American people. And a couple of weeks ago, when I was talking to Texas Representative Vincent Perez, he was one of the Democrats in Texas who fled the state to prevent the quorum. And I was asking him about this. And he said, look, well, what's going to happen in Texas is actually going to affect national politics. It's not going to stay in Texas, because it would essentially allow Republicans to keep control of the House. So that is essentially the justification. But I said to him, but if you're turning around and saying you can't possibly let this happen in Texas because it's going to disenfranchise voters, and in his mind it was unfair to the Hispanic voters and it would overrepresent the white voters, it was a whole racial thing, but you're telling me that they're going to be able to do this in California, and I know Hochul's talking about doing it in New York, and other governors are talking about it, and they're going to be fair, and it's going to be fair to the citizens in that state. So I don't know, it's just, as an American, I find this whole thing to be extremely frustrating.
It's bad for democracy, and it also means that, every 2 years when the entire U.S. House is up, Jill, it wasn't that long ago. I mean, I remember covering midterm elections and House elections even 20 years ago, and there were probably 70 seats we would look at as competitive. Then it was 40. Then it was 30. With the way the gerrymandering is now heading, we might be down to like just over a dozen competitive seats in the coming years as they redraw the lines. And when you talk about it being bad for democracy, it's also bad for like 40-something% of Californians who happen to be Republican and 40-something% of Texans who happen to be Democrat, that they continue to lose representation.
So back to California, Democrats already hold 43 of California's 52 House seats, about 83%. Newsom says more can be done to increase the Democratic advantage in California and fight back against red states and make 48 of the 52 seats in California blue.
Now, again, it's a 2-step process in California. He's going to have to convince voters in California to vote for this. Right now, polling shows that the independent commission remains popular. But if Texas actually moves ahead here and redraws 5 of their districts, the hope Newsom and Democrats have in California is that enough Californians will go to the polls this fall and saying, you know what, forget the independent commission. Guys, redraw the districts however you need to ensure the Democrats can remain competitive in the U.S. Congress. And as we began this story, you talked about Indiana. Ohio is in the mix here. Missouri is in the mix here. Maryland's potentially in the mix here. New York's in the mix. Some of those are red states. Some of those are blue states. Florida, DeSantis is talking about making it even redder. And so this is something we'll continue to watch. Texas will make the first move here, it looks like, but it could set off quite a domino effect. And again, take something that's been around for 200 years, gerrymandering, and take it to levels we've never seen.
And finally, from Billboard, Taylor Swift set another record. And this time, it's not about music. It's what we're doing here, podcasting. Swift's very first podcast interview set a new record for live viewership. The 2-hour chat went live Wednesday. It shattered YouTube records for concurrent viewers. As of Sunday evening, the episode's already topped 18 million views.
And that's just YouTube. Of course, you listen, as some of you are listening to this podcast right now, on Spotify, on iHeart, on Apple, on, all the various apps. And so I think we'll get a better sense this week of just how many people have listened to it and watched it, Jill. My hope, Jill, is that now that Taylor's done her first podcast, maybe she's going to be willing to do more. We're talking to you, Taylor.
So for those who watched the YouTube live stream, it reached as high as 1.3 million, but about an hour and 45 minutes into the episode, it crashed. Even with it crashing, that number still places it in the number one spot. Jason Kelce, who's Travis Kelce's brother and one of the hosts of the podcast, wrote on X, quote, "I mean, this video being 1.3 million views is the epitome of numerology." He is referencing Swift's famous lucky number 13 and their discussion of numerical musical Easter eggs on the podcast.
Yeah, no, she went into a lesson for them on numerology. Jason Kelce being described as this generation's Barbara Walters. Jill, he did most of the questioning there. Did a pretty good job, I should say. It was obviously a very friendly environment, but it does reinforce the conversation we've been having recently. The cancellation of Colbert and the late night show issues, because in a previous era, not a Taylor Swift era, but maybe actually a Taylor Swift era, she would have rolled this out on a more traditional show, right? You go on a late night show and roll this thing out. And this day and age, you go on your boyfriend's podcast, in the case of Taylor Swift, and roll out a major announcement. We're going to be watching this to see, if it tops basically every major podcast record in history. Joe Rogan's one of the record holders with his Elon Musk sit down from a few years ago, which is nearly 70 million views. Rogan's interview with Trump last year has 59 million views. So again, Swift at 18 million. We'll watch if and when she's able to top that.
Some initial data from Spotify also saying the episode became one of the highest performing podcasts of the past year and boosted female listenership of the show by more than 600%. The album, again, The Life of a Showgirl, drops on October 3rd. And what is interesting is that the commentary, for the most part, has been very, very positive about Swift and also Travis Kelce. And you're seeing comments from men who listen to that podcast really for the football, making comments like, I actually like Taylor Swift now. She was really likable. She's really smart.
Very likable, very genuine. They come across as like really a great couple, Jill. And it's so interesting because, there were all those like conspiracy theories last year, some pushed from the right, that like they were put up to this relationship by the CIA or Pfizer to push the vaccine. Do you remember this stuff? Or to like get Joe Biden to win the election? It's like, no, you listen to them, you're like, no, these two actually like really like each other and respect each other. It was actually, listening to it, like very nice to hear them and how he compliments her and like their relationship there. Some people, by the way, Jill, as we talk about Easter eggs, thinking Taylor somehow may be saying she's going to do the halftime show in so many words. I mean, she didn't say it explicitly, right? But like some people are construing some of the things that she said, her football knowledge, to be like, all right, now it'll be the Swift Super Bowl halftime show at some point.
I don't know, because I'm a Taylor Swift fan, but I'm not like an Easter egg Taylor Swift fan. I just am in it for the music.
Let's talk about the color orange. Yeah.
I just took it as, hey, my boyfriend's a professional football player, so I'm going to learn about football. But you also saw Taylor Swift fans who listened to the podcast saying, I like the Kelce brothers. It was just a win for everybody.
Except for the people who came up with the theory that the CIA and Pfizer created their relationship.
No, they're losers.
Definitely didn't win. Or maybe they can somehow take this interview to reinforce their views.
No, they're going to be like, Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce, you should thank the CIA. They forced you into this relationship and it actually worked out. It's like an arranged marriage that worked.
Right, and you failed in this attempt to get Joe Biden reelected president. All right, now time for On This Day in History. We begin in 1920 on this day, when the 19th Amendment was officially ratified after Tennessee, by just one vote, became the 36th state to approve the 19th Amendment. The 19th Amendment was women's right to vote. It was a 72-year fight that began in 1848 with women suffragists like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott meeting in Seneca Falls to discuss women's rights. And they fought throughout the 1800s, finally through the early 20th century, and won the right to vote. Jill, partially after Woodrow Wilson, who was president in 1919, called a special session of Congress to personally appeal for women's suffrage. Congress had voted down the amendment 6 times for women's right to vote, and they finally got it through that last time in 1919, and then 36 states ultimately were required to ratify it. On this day in 1969, Woodstock wrapped up after 3 famous nights and a mid-morning set by Jimi Hendrix. Some of you might be familiar with the Jimi Hendrix performance at Woodstock. They would put him on the national stage. On this day in 1991, Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev was placed under house arrest during a coup by Russian military officials. They were very upset by the reforms he was passing to the Soviet Union. Now, Boris Yeltsin, who was an up-and-comer at that time, talked down the military, but the Communist Party would dissolve in the coming months. They would recognize the independence of several of the Baltic countries like Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia. And by December of 1991, several months after this coup, Gorbachev would resign, marking the end of the Soviet Union. We end here with a bit of music and pop culture history. First, a happy birthday to acting legend Robert Redford. He turns 89 years old today. And a bit of music history. On this day in 1986, Bon Jovi releases their album, Slippery When Wet. So Slippery When Wet, officially 39 years old today. That album would give us You Give Love a Bad Name, Wanted Dead or Alive, and Living on a Prayer. So
Living on a Prayer. Sorry, I can't hear that without singing.
Do you want to try again in tune?
No, I can't do it better. That's it. That's the best I get.
That's okay, Jill. I don't know if you want to give this one a try, but on this day in 2001,
Oh, no. What is it?
by Alicia Keys reached #1 on the Billboard chart. So that was 24 years ago today, Alicia Keys. I keep on falling in love with you. Ooh.
I guess technically it's easier.
And then like baritone almost, right? So the music experts will tune in. The music experts, like most, that wasn't technically baritone. Okay, that was like soprano. Anyway, I don't know. But we're going to end this before we disturb your hearing further.
Before you guys just say enough, we can't listen anymore. So thank you all for bearing with our singing and listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
The people who stay till the end, Jill, they're the real ones.
They are, Moshe, and they'll deal with our singing. And I did get so many nice messages from people because I mentioned in What We're Watching, Reading, Eating, again, about that softball game, the artist-writer softball game, and that I did not play last year. So I posted the picture of myself on the field at third base, and I got so many people writing in, oh, you played, you got to play, they put you in. So thank you guys for the support. I appreciate it.
Next year, she'll be the team captain, everybody.
Yeah.
Mosh, get in right field.
Mike Lupica, sorry. I know you're like the greatest sports writer.
Mike Lupica will coach that game. He'll play in that game until his last day.
All right, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Listen to more than the app.